When we think about modern conflict, our minds usually jump to images of overwhelming force, shock and awe, a swift, decisive victory. But today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a very different kind of strategy, one that isn't about winning in the traditional sense. It's about a grim contest of wills, a doctrine built on one single, brutal principle: endurance. We're looking at a playbook where the goal is simply to outlast your opponent, to make the fight so painful, so costly, and so drawn out that they have no choice but to back down.
And right here, this one statement, it basically lays out the entire playbook. It charts a course to victory that doesn't even target the main opponent directly. Think about that. The objective isn't to force the United States to the negotiating table through a head-on fight. No. The goal is to inflict such intense economic pain on its wealthy, stability-loving allies in the Gulf that they are the ones who have to step in. They become the leverage. They're the ones who have to pressure Washington to stop the fighting. It's a strategy of indirect warfare, like a bank shot on a global geopolitical pool table.
So you have to ask, why go through all this trouble? Why such a complicated, roundabout approach? Well, the answer is as simple as it is bleak, because traditional diplomacy is completely and utterly dead. The very bedrock of any negotiation, that basic level of mutual trust, it's been ground down to nothing. There is simply no common ground left, no starting point from which to even begin to talk about peace.
To really get just how deep this distrust runs, you only need to look at one incident that says it all. Iran puts forward a horrific accusation. A U.S. Tomahawk missile hit a girls' school, killing 165 people. Now, the American response isn't just a denial, it's a counter-accusation so cynical it's almost hard to believe, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, Iran had attacked its own children. When the conversation gets to that point, where one side is alleging a war crime and the other is raising the possibility of a false flag against its own people, well, the very idea of a good-faith negotiation just vanishes into thin air. So when Iran says, there is no more room for diplomacy, you have to understand that's not just some empty threat. It's a conclusion they've reached after what they see as a long, bitter history of deception. From their point of view, past negotiations were just a smokescreen for more attacks. So to them, talking isn't just pointless, it's dangerous. It's walking into a trap. And with that, the door on a peaceful resolution has been slammed shut, locked, and bolted.
So, with the door to diplomacy closed, another one opens, a much more dangerous one. A strategy not of de-escalation, but of deliberate, methodical escalation. Because if you can't talk, the only language left is force. The goal is no longer to try and find some kind of common ground. The goal now is to reshape the entire strategic environment by turning instability itself into a weapon.
If I suffer, you must suffer too. This is the raw, almost primal logic that starts driving every single decision. It's a massive shift away from a straightforward military contest, which, let's be honest, Iran knows it can't win against a superpower, and it moves towards a battle of national willpower. The thinking is brutally simple. Let's create shared misery. Let's turn this conflict into a test of who can stand the pain longer. It's a dangerous way to level the playing field, turning the entire region into a crucible of endurance.
Now, this isn't just chaos for chaos's sake. There's a method here, a clear four-step plan. Step 1, you light fires all across the region, creating this constant nagging sense of instability. Step 2, you aim that instability directly at the economic heart of America's allies in the Gulf. These are nations built on stability and commerce. Step 3 is where the psychology comes in. Wealthy, stable nations hate risk. They have the most to lose, so the pain of instability hits them hard, and it forces them to do something, anything, to make it stop, which means putting pressure on their American allies. And that leads to the end game. Step 4. If and when talks ever start again, Iran comes back to the table not as a desperate, weakened nation, but as the one who proved it could make the cost of conflict unbearable for everyone.
Okay, let's drill down into the nuts and bolts of how this pain is actually delivered. Because at its core, this has become a war of attrition. But it's not just fought on the battlefield. It's being fought on spreadsheets and in treasury departments. It's a war of budgets, where the winner might just be the one who doesn't go broke first.
So on one side of the ledger, you have this, the Patriot missile system. It's the gold standard of air defense for the U.S. and its allies, an incredible piece of technology. But every time it fires one of its interceptors to take down a threat, it costs $4 million. $4 million for a single shot.
And now, look at the other side of the equation. This is the primary weapon being used against it. A drone. It costs about $20,000. It's cheap, it's easy to make in large numbers, and most importantly, it is completely disposable.
This difference in price isn't just a small detail, it's the entire economic strategy in a nutshell.
When you put those two numbers next to each other, the strategy becomes crystal clear. The defenders are forced to spend millions of dollars to stop a threat that costs just thousands to launch. This is an economic death by 1,000 cuts, a severe financial hemorrhage. And it's not even about a one-for-one trade. The attackers can send swarms of these cheap drones, forcing the defenders into an impossible choice. For Iran, every single time a Patriot missile is fired, it's a win. It doesn't even matter if their drone hits anything. They force their opponent to spend a fortune. Over time, that kind of math, it's just not sustainable, not even for the richest countries in the world.
And this lopsided, unsustainable math, it leads us directly into the psychological heart of this whole thing. The endurance doctrine isn't really about money or weapons. Those are just the tools. It's about psychology. It's about understanding and exploiting the hidden weaknesses that come with being a superpower. It's about breaking the will to continue the fight.
To really wrap your head around this, we can borrow a basic concept from economics: diminishing marginal utility. It sounds complicated, but the idea is incredibly simple. Imagine it's a scorching hot day. That first glass of ice-cold water you drink, it's amazing, life-changing. The second glass is still pretty good, but by the time you're on your 10th glass, you're not getting much satisfaction at all. Each additional glass provides less and less benefit or utility than the one before it. Well, believe it or not, the same exact principle applies to war.
Let's map this idea directly onto the conflict. The very first U.S. strikes, they had an incredibly high utility. They were devastatingly effective, taking out nearly 50 senior Iranian leaders, a huge strategic victory. But just a week later, that utility started to plummet. More attacks produced smaller and smaller results, while the costs kept piling up. And as the conflict drags on, it eventually crosses a threshold into negative utility. At this point, the entire equation flips. The unbelievable financial costs, and more importantly, the tragic loss of American lives, start to dwarf any possible benefit. Every single day the war continues from this point on is a net loss for the superpower.
And this is what leads us to the ultimate paradox of power. The superpower, with its global reputation, its complex economy, its voters, it has everything to lose. It is, by its very nature, allergic to casualties and long, drawn-out wars. It's built to seek a fast, clean, decisive win. The underdog, on the other hand, is operating from a place of desperation. They feel they have nothing left to lose. So for them, a long, ugly, messy conflict is actually an advantage. Every day they can prolong the fight, every dollar they can force their opponent to spend, that is a victory. And just like that, their greatest perceived weakness, their desperation, becomes their most powerful strategic weapon.
But what if the most dangerous part of this conflict has nothing to do with missiles or drones at all? The strategy of endurance doesn't just stop when the shooting stops. It plans for a war after the war. An unseen front, where the goal is the same, but the weapons are completely different.
Imagine the scene. The bombing has stopped. There's this fragile quiet. But underneath that quiet, a new kind of conflict is brewing. Protests start to pop up. They look spontaneous, but they're being subtly amplified and shaped by outside influence. The goal has now shifted. It's no longer about external military pressure, it's about internal destabilization. The objective is to fracture the society itself, to accomplish from the inside what military might couldn't accomplish from the outside, to bring down the entire regime.
This is a different kind of warfare. It's a war without bullets, fought online, in the news, and on the streets. Its damage isn't measured in bombed-out buildings, but in the loss of social trust, in the divisions between people. You see, a missile can destroy a building, and you can rebuild a building. But this kind of conflict aims to inflict wounds that are much deeper and much harder to heal. It creates cracks in the very foundation of a society.
And so, after all of this, we're left with a pretty profound question. We've gone from the death of diplomacy to a brutal war of spreadsheets, into the deep psychology of endurance, and finally to a covert battle for the hearts and minds of an entire people. It makes you wonder, in this new era of conflict, a conflict fought on so many fronts at once, from the desert battlefield all the way to our own social media feeds, where does the real battlefield even lie anymore?